Consider supporting ArchaeoSoup on Patreon for as little as $1 per month. Link available in video description. Thank you. Hello and welcome back to another Real World Archaeology. In this series we cast an archaeological eye over television, film and other forms of entertainment to see how historically and archaeologically accurate they are. In the past we've looked at films like The 300, Outlander, Tomb Raider, and all of those have been kind of good fun. But today's film is a film that I never thought I'd watch. I never thought it would be in my house. But I saw it in a charity shop for 99p and I figured it would be good for my soul. Just to sort of cleanse something. I'm talking about 10,000 BC. 10,000 BC is a film that came out in 2008, written and directed, as it were, by Roland Emmerich, who is a marvellous filmmaker. He's a German director who has made some of the most impressive and memorable Hollywood action blockbuster popcorn flicks of all time, certainly of the past 20 years. His films tend to range from the deeply entertaining and tremendously fun to the really kind of bad to the so bad that they're actually really good. And just looking at the DVD cover and the movie poster for 10,000 BC, I'm not quite sure where this film's going to end up. I know it's not going to be good, but is it going to be bad, or is it going to be so bad that it's actually kind of good? I just don't know. But looking at it, my hopes aren't high. I mean, it's got a man and a saber-toothed tiger facing off. Human beings never met. Homo sapiens never met saber-toothed tigers. They were extinct by the time we sort of were in the same place. So, yeah. So I started watching it yesterday morning and posted it on the Facebook page that I was doing this, and got a series of comments on that post along the lines of commiserations. Don't play a drinking game with this, otherwise you'll end up in hospital. People talking about how they had to stop themselves from sort of twitching as they were watching this film. So primarily for health and safety reasons, I'm watching this movie in sections. This is part one. So the movie starts out with shots of snowy mountaintops and a snowy landscape, very much kind of like a late Ice Age landscape, and a voiceover that says, "Only time can teach us what is truth and what is legend." And at this point I'm sort of going, that's a sort of a meaningless sentence really, isn't it? What is truth, what is legend? Well, truths become legends over time, but you can't discern the truth of a legend the further away from it you are in time. So time will not tell us what is true and what is legend. In fact, it may well make some truths into legends, and legends will continue to be legends or even become myth, if you're lucky. So time won't do that. So a meaningless statement at the beginning. And he goes on to say, some truths will not survive the ages. Now that's true, yeah, some truths, some life paths and life ways haven't survived, and that's a shame. But the legend of the child with the blue eyes will be passed on forever. Now, there's also a hint here of evolutionary sort of assumptionism, as it were, that kind of doesn't sit very well with me. This assumption that to be blunt, for example, brown eyes came first and then blue eyes came in later, and so on and so forth. But actually research has shown, and this is before Cheddar Man and his DNA was examined earlier this year, research has shown that people coming into Europe had blue eyes in the gene pool. It's not like blue eyes arrived later on as some sort of step up in humanity. It's just, it's always been there. So I'm not going to give the film a negative for that, because okay, that's fairly particular genetic research and papers and all this sort of thing. But I'm very much, I'm strapping in at this point for the movie. Now, it starts off actually with something that I quite like, and that is the story of the Yagal, and how these people were hunters of the mightiest of all beasts, the manak, or the mammoth. And I think that's good, hinting that people at this time relied on these giant animals, these sort of huge migrations of creatures like mammoth for their food, and that is absolutely true. Good. Another good point is that observations about the mammoth coming less frequently to their valley are crucial to the Yagal, to these people, this sort of tribe who are living in a valley. And I'll come back to the idea of valley life in a bit. But they would absolutely notice when this food resource, when this annual migration at least started to come at different times of year, or maybe didn't come at all. If they rely on it, then they would notice it. So that's good. There's also reference to Old Mother, an old lady in the tribe, the last of her people, supposedly. Not quite sure what that means. Is she meant to be a Neanderthal, maybe? I don't know. But I like that because she's a female figure, and supposedly she speaks to the spirits of the earth. And this again is not too bad, in so much as it references Venus figurines and the sort of things that we find in the Paleolithic in particular, that strongly indicate that people at this time had a strong sense of the female divine, or the female being connected to something bigger. Maybe a female, like a goddess, who knows? But this idea of the Old Mother being a wise woman in the village who can speak to the gods, or to the fathers and the spirits of the earth, is very good. Now, what's good and bad, though, immediately we get to see the Yagal, and they look kind of like a crude stereotype of primitive people. They just look dirty. They look kind of filthy and rough around the edges, and yet all the evidence that we find from this time archaeologically shows that people are likely to have been fairly clean for a start. It's very easy, for example, to have a snow bath, if nothing else, even if you can't find some, like a lake to dip into. But also, actually, their clothes would have been meticulously made. In addition to stone tools, in particular in Europe, some of the earliest evidence that we find are sewing needles. So making well tailored clothes with hundreds of different individual parts, specifically to keep you warm, and crucially with nicely sewn up seams, so you're not letting cold air in, for example, is crucial to human survival at this point. So the idea that these people would have been running around basically in sort of fairly crude clothes and just sort of looking a bit grimy is good and bad, I suppose. We can identify that these are Paleolithic people. They've got the right sort of stuff, but they're not wearing it right, if so. Certainly not in this archaeologist's opinion. So that's good and bad. What is bad, though, is the fact that everyone has dreadlocks. Like, why? Why can't people cut their hair? It's almost certain that people cut their hair. If you look at people, for example, let's say the Inuit. People in colder climates, and even the Inuits' ancestors, when they were relying on a lifestyle that's similar to Paleolithic people in terms of tools and in snowy climates, they can cut their hair. They can even shave. Goodness me! So everyone's got dreadlocks, no matter how old they are. Everyone's got dreadlocks. I think that's kind of bad. Now, what's kind of good, though, is that everyone's gathering in a hut for a ceremony. And crucially here, they're gathering in a hut. In a hut. They're not cavemen. At least. Thank you, Roland. You're not showing these people living in a cave. So that's good as well. The huts also are made partially out of mammoth bones, just like the mammoth bone huts of Mesowych. So actually, this is starting to add up to some good. Is this film going to be good? Possibly. Now, the old mother has a vision when during the ceremony. She sort of goes into a trance, and she sees four-legged demons that are about to approach. And actually, as she's having this trance, a little girl with blue eyes called Evelette has been found in the mountains, and she's brought into the tent, into the hut, and she is sort of a signal of good and bad to come, apparently, says the old mother. But what is bad from an archaeological perspective is that these people would absolutely know what a horse is. So the idea of four-legged demons will come to the valley is just nonsense. We know from cave art, for example, Paleolithic art, we know that they saw horses, they probably hunted and ate horses across the continent. Wild horses were fairly common, so they would have known what a horse was, and probably would have known what it looked like when someone rode on a horse or tried to ride on a horse. So four-legged demons, that's bad. But there is a promise of some good to come as well. According to the old mother, this time of turmoil, the last hunt, will lead their people to a time of plenty, when the Yagal will no longer struggle to have food. And that's a promise of the warming of the planet, coming into the Pleistocene, the end of the Ice Age. Who knows? I mean, I'm not going to give that a mark for good or bad, but who knows what that means. But I do like the myth of the last hunt. Again, this is good, in my opinion. This rings true in many respects. There are various religions, societies, cultures today and in history that have this idea of a grand moment, sort of a battle, perhaps, in the case of Ragnarok, maybe. And amongst Christians, there's this idea of rapture. With hunting societies, there is an idea that there will be moments of high drama tied in with how they live in the landscape. And this idea of the last hunt being a moment when everything will change does ring true. And I like that. It's drawing on something that's ethnographically sound. So again, there's something else that's good. Goodness me. And out of this time will come a great leader, and apparently the blue-eyed girl, Evelette, will be his woman. Apparently. Now, what's goodish is that the leader of the hunt is the holder of the white spear, a spear that seems to be made out of mammoth bone in particular and tusk, and he decides to leave the valley because he doesn't believe this prophecy. But I like the idea of there being a significant leader who is showing his worth through the hunt and through his ability to lead people in that vital resource gathering activity. And anyway, he passes his spear to Tick Tick. I love the name Tick Tick, and Tick Tick sort of becomes the leader of the hunt, or something like that. So it's goodish that the leader of the hunt has a spear that kind of shows him and his status because of what he does. That's, again, sort of rings true. Something else that's kind of good as well is that the next scene shows the son of that guy who's just left the valley because he hasn't got time to wait for this prophecy to come true. Shows his son being bullied by other children, and what I like about this is not the fact that he's being bullied. His son Delaire is being bullied during play. So there's a guy called Karen, not Karen, Karen, who's decided to stop picking on this boy. But crucially, they are playing. They're practicing with a spear, but it is children at play, and that's good as well. That's actually something I feel very strongly about: is the portrayal of children in the past, and accepting that children had childhoods, even in the Paleolithic, even at the end of the Ice Age. That's good. Maybe I'm looking for too much good here. Who knows? Young Evelette and Delaire have a moment together where they both feel like outsiders. He's being bullied, she's not from around here, and they start to bond. And what's good in this moment is that there's a subtle hint that people have always noticed the stars. So Delaire says, "You see that star, that light over there? It never moves. That is you in my heart." And it's kind of sweet, but also crucially, it's showing that people have always looked up at the stars. I like that. That's a good. I think that deserves a good. Then the title appears, 10,000 BC. And don't worry, I can hear you typing already. This is going to get an obligatory bad because BC annoys a lot of people. I get it. Academics, archaeologists, people in general sometimes or often would much prefer that we call these epochs of time BCE and CE instead of BCAD. Personally, I don't mind, and I don't particularly care, in so much as it's referring to the same point in time, and I don't think you have to subscribe to Christianity to say BCAD. It's what we've been using for a couple of thousand years now, and personally, I find it easier on a different, basically letters. They sometimes confuse me. I'm a dyslexic, so BCAD easy to differentiate. BCE, CE, a bit more awkward for me, but I hear you. It's going to get a bad. So there you go. There's a bad, an obligatory bad for BC instead of BCE. Now, following the title, around 20 years have passed, and Delay is a grown-up, and we see him sitting next to a young boy called Baku out in the landscape. And that means that actually the prologue to this film took place around 10,020 BC, which I suppose is a less compelling title, really, than 10,000 BC. Or BCE. So, okay, so we're at 10,000 BC, and Delay is grown up, and Evelet comes to him and says, Delay, I'm worried that Karen is going to win the white spear in tomorrow's hunt, because then he'll be able to claim me as his woman, when clearly the two of them, Delay and Evelet, have a growing love for each other, and she wants to be with him. Oh, but all of this is interrupted when Baku comes running around the corner and says, "They're here! The mammoth have arrived!" And this is quite impressive. As someone who's always wanted to see a mammoth, it's nice seeing this herd emerge over the horizon and make their way across the valley. And it's also actually quite cool seeing suddenly the whole village get ready for this. This is a big event, and this is a crucial event for them. And so this gets a good as well. This is exactly the sort of thing that it would have been, as it were, such a monumental event in their annual cycle would be the hunt of the mammoth and getting as much mammoth meat as possible. And as part of this this preparation, I also like the fact that Tik Tik, who is the current leader of the hunt, says that the fathers of the Yagal and the spirit of the mighty mammoth themselves will choose the holder of the new white spear. It implies a sort of affinity between the people who are doing the hunting and the prey on which they rely. And this, again, this rings true ethnographically. Often you'll have people who maybe hunt whales who have a whale god, if you see what I mean. And the same goes here. So I like that. All of that gets a good, I think. I think it deserves a good. At this point, I've seen a few people complain in reviews of this film that there's an inaccuracy in so much as the people are just waiting for the mammoth to come past as opposed to following them through the landscape. And I'm not going to give this a good or a bad in so much as yes and no. Around 10,000 BC, people probably would have been a bit more migratory, a bit more transient in the landscape, following resources. But actually, in the LGM, the last glacial maximum, around 20,000 BC, I guess, people would have been, as far as we can tell, potentially a bit more stationary, because actually they needed to plan very carefully where and how they were going to get their food and resources from. Also, frankly, it was much more difficult to set up huts and this kind of thing because the ground's frozen solid, wood is a little less common, so on and so forth. And so using mammoth bone, which is hard to move, by the way, and staying in one place and planning how you interact with migrations of birds and animals through the landscape was crucial. So people wouldn't necessarily have to follow the mammoth all year. They can plan around it. So I'm not going to give it a good or a bad, but I thought I would address that as a complaint, if you see what I mean. Now, what is good is that the hunting of the mammoth is impressive. I was eager to see how they were going to play this out, and they start off by crawling through the grass of the tundra towards the mammoth until Tik Tik finds the lead bull, supposedly, jumps up with his spear, starts making a tremendous amount of noise, scares the bull, and quite as you might expect, quite rightly, a stampede begins, because if that guy runs away, all of the other mammoth are following, and I thought. This is great. This is brilliant. And what are they going to sort of to use this teamwork to drive the mammoth off a cliff? As we see archaeologically, there are areas where mammoth have been driven off cliffs. I think the Isle of Wight is one of them, and they all sort of fell to the ground. And that's how people not only tackled these giant creatures, but also actually got the volume of food and meat that they required. Was killing them en masse by driving them off a cliff. Is this what we're about to see? No! There's an elaborate counterweighted contraption at the end of a sort of a narrow little valley that they've driven the mammoth through. That they sort of push a boulder, it pulls on a rope, pulls a net up, and catches the runt, the last mammoth of the group. Only that one, just catches that one. And yet, I was like, that's not the point of hunting mammoth. You don't tend to hunt one mammoth at a time because you can't afford to. These creatures will be gone out of your land, out of your territory, out of your landscape within maybe a week or so. You need as much as possible. One at a time, and using this elaborate contraption, I'm not sure it's going to work. And actually, it doesn't work. This mammoth runs into the net, breaks the bonds, runs with the net on it, and all these people are holding on to the net like rag dolls. And I was thinking, that's exactly why. That's why you don't hunt. That's why they didn't hunt like that. That's why, for example, they would tend to drive mammoth off cliffs or something, or maybe, yes, okay, concentrate on one mammoth, but ultimately from a distance throwing spears at it, this kind of thing. A net, an elaborate contraption that fails to capture even the smallest of the group, is just a terrible idea, and I blame the filmmaker. But yeah, so bad, sadly. Then it all becomes, as I say, it's a bit of a farce. That's another bad when the mammoth breaks free. And then what's also bad is that our hero gets Delay, that is, gets his hand caught in the net, dragged up onto a little plain on top of a hill, where he throws a spear at the mammoth, it misses, and then he does the slightly cliche thing of planting a spear in the ground so that the mammoth runs into it. Now, looking at the size of the spear, unless it was very, very well placed, it wouldn't work. It just wouldn't work. It's also a cliche. It's just a tremendous cinematic cliche. You know, we've seen it, for example, in the 300 and all sorts of other places. You know, plant, hold. No, and okay, fine. It was a fluke, and he brings the mammoth down. But also, actually, he's running away. He plants the spear and starts running as well. He doesn't actually. It's all a bit of a, after such a great start to the mammoth hunt, working as a team, driving the mammoth, they waste the opportunity to show an actual mammoth hunt, and I think that's really disappointing. So yeah, that's another bad, unfortunately. It just undermines the whole premise of the hunt. And in fact, in the film, they say, no one has ever done this before. You must claim the spear. And he does. And they also he claims his woman as well, the blue-eyed Evelette. And it just feels naff, if so I mean. And so this is where the film, I think, is going to start to disappoint me more and more. What's good, though, is that the mammoth is basically stripped to the bone. Every bit of meat is used, and you see people carrying little bits of meat on sticks and things. That's what we think they did. Drying them out to store them, sort of preserving them, cooking them on fires. They're going to use the bones for their huts and all this sort of thing. That is good. But there's a problem, you see. Tick-Tick knows that Delay didn't hold on to the net and hunt the mammoth. He knows that Delay had his arm caught in the net by accident, and so Delay feels obliged to hand the spear back to Tick-Tick because he achieved this through a lie, and as opposed to being brave, and also in that sense he's giving up on Evelette as well. So Evelette is sad about that. Single tear. Now that night the white rain comes, and I'm not going to give this a score, good or bad, but I find the term white rain to describe snow both good and bad, if that's what I mean. In English it sounds primitive, it sounds deliberate, it sounds like primitivism. This is clearly how people would describe snow, white rain, as opposed to having a word for snow, if you see what I mean. But I also like this though, in so much as it's a compelling linguistic thing. The word for white for snow may well mean white rain. So it's neither it's both good and bad, and so it sort of cancels itself out, I think. But I don't know. I kind of like it, but I also think again it's this sort of it's a projection of primitiveness onto people as opposed to them having a word for snow. They don't know what it is. It's white rain, even though it's the end of the ice age. They've seen snow all the time. They'll have a word. They'll have a word for snow, if you see what I mean. So the white rain comes along with the four-legged demons, and they arrive. And Delay, though, because he's been shamed, he's sleeping away from the camp in disgrace. And this whole sequence actually reminds me of the opening scene of Conan the Barbarian, where these marauders come through the village and the whole place is slaughtered, and Conan's the only one who survives. That's kind of what happens here. People are being killed, people are being taken away, presumably to be slaves, and their costume and technology appears to be from another time. I'm just getting a little hint of this in how they're dressed. They're dressed kind of like medieval people from the Middle East, which is a bad. I mean, it's got to be a bad, hasn't it? Because it's bad in so much as, so if nothing else, in contrast to the dress and the art style that's been established for the Yagal people, these people look as though they're literally from another time. They've stepped off from a time machine. So that's got to be bad. It is a bad. So it is bad. There's also they're locking people up in these chunky wooden handcuffs, like something that you'd see in a medieval torture chamber, or frankly in Hellboy. Actually, he's locked up in one of those at one point. What's that about? This is 10,000 BC. 10,000 BC. This is not early medieval times. So yeah, that's another bad as well. This technology, one good though, and this is an incidental good, but I'll give it to the film, is that they are portraying that people outside the valley live in a different way to people in the valley, and this is something that we see archaeologically. In particular, one of my favourite sites in Europe is Lepenski Vir in Serbia, I think, on the banks of the Danube, where people held on to a Mesolithic way of living by the river, fishing and living in their community long after everyone around them outside the valley had become farmers. They'd entered essentially the Neolithic. So actually that's an incidental good. It's not good how they've done it, but I'm going to give the film a good for that, because it's true. People were living. It was possible to live in a certain way in a valley, and have people around you living in a different way. That's good, I guess. The leader of these people who've stepped off a time machine spots Everlet and says, "Tie her to my horse," in a weird foreign language, which is again, it's kind of good. I'm not going to give it a score as good, but it's kind of good because it shows that again the people outside the valley are different. But it's weird as well because they've digitally altered the voice of this guy. It sounds like he's got this sort of robotic kind of thing going on. I don't know why they did that. Although I'll come to back to that in a moment. But anyway, he ties her to the horse, leaves, and Delay decides to hunt down these demons, these people who've stolen people from the village. Now, there is a hint of good here as well when we see Baku with his mum, who sadly was killed in the raid, and we get a hint of a death ritual. That's also good, showing that people in the Paleolithic cared about the dead and probably they're about to bury the dead. It may seem incidental to you possibly, or to some people watching this video, but often prehistoric people are shown as not caring about the dead, whereas it's nice to see a hint of a death ritual, so that's good. Anyway, Delay decides to hunt down the demons. He's joined by Karen and Tik Tik, and they follow the horse tracks up into the mountains, where soon the white rain, the snow, covers up the tracks, and they have to rely on their wits to follow. But before we follow the bad guys, as it were, on this journey, I just want to just establish something, and that is that there is an uncomfortable undertone here of the stereotype of the noble savage. This is a very old stereotype. It comes from hundreds of years ago, where people had the sense that the savage had the capacity to be an untouched, pure human being who wasn't sullied by civilization, and even though he was savage, he was also deeply noble, a good human being, even though he was savage. It was a slightly patronising way of viewing people who lived, or indeed live, in, say, a non-Western civilization, or a non-Western culture. But also, in this film, we have this noble way of living being contrasted with, ironically, a savage Arab, frankly, group. These people who have arrived, they look like Arabs. They're kind of wearing sort of turban-like stuff. They kind of have Roland Emmerich has clearly chosen actors who look like they're from the Middle East or thereabouts, and it's an uncomfortable modern idea, to be blunt, that somehow there's a purity to and an honesty to how people were living in prehistoric Europe, but then the civilization and technology, and especially in the Middle East, corrupts people. I'm not sure what that's doing in this film, especially in a film about 10,000 BC. So that's a bad, I'm afraid. The noble savage and the savage Arab, these are stereotypes that have no place in a film set in 10,000 BC. Simple as that. So Daler, Karen and Tik Tik trek over the mountains, and they're followed by young Baku, who at this point, it's too late, they can't turn him back, so you might as well come along for the journey. You know, the classic young boy following the adventurer's trope that we see in so many stories. And what's good here is that I like a little moment in their tracking of the demons, because as they're tracking them, yes, they lose the tracks in the snow, but they use other cues in the landscape. And when they come across some rocks that have been used for a fire, Daler touches the rocks, which are still warm, and he uses a little phrase that I like, and I'm going to give it a good, because again, I like it when people use clever linguistic cues to hint that people are thinking in a slightly different way. And in this instance, he says, "Fire still lives in these stones," and I think that's quite a nice turn of phrase. The rocks are still warm. The stones are still warm. Fire still lives in them. I like that. And also, I think it does touch on something which is ethnographically and probably historically, archaeologically true, and that is that fire, life, warmth, these are associations that we see across the world and through time. So I kind of like that. I think that deserves a good. The bad guys spot at this point that Evelette, who's been obviously being dragged by a horse, has been dropping bits of her jewellery as they go, leaving a little sort of a crumb trail for anyone who might be following. And then she is whipped by a whip that seems to have little bits of metal on the end. And I'm like, is that metal? Is that metal on that whip? No, it must be bone. It must be bone. I won't give it a bad for that. It's fine. It must be bone. It can't be metal. It'll be fine. So I'm really hoping that's not metal. But anyway, moving on. Our heroes, Daler, Tik Tik, Karen and Baku, come across the rest of Evelette's necklace. It's been pulled from her neck, thrown to the ground, and it seems to have blood on it. And clearly she's been whipped to the point of bleeding onto this thing. And obviously you're going, as an audience member. But then Daler sort of picks up the necklace and looks up and sees that the sort of snowy mountain tundra-like landscape melts into a jungle. Like in the space of maybe a mile or two, suddenly there's a jungle. And this makes me wonder, where is this meant to be? Like, I know where it was filmed. It was filmed in New Zealand, Namibia and South Africa. But in the real world, or in history, where is this supposed to be taking place? I get that maybe the mountains and the snow and the tundra-ishness, presumably filmed in the uplands of New Zealand, is meant to be late Ice Age, early Pleistocene Europe, okay? But then, where can you walk from tundra into a jungle. Now, inevitably, that is where the prisoners and the bad guys have gone, and we cut to a shot of this caravan of people going through the jungle into the long grass. Now, where have I heard that before?
Don't go into the long grass!
And sure enough, just like Jurassic Park: The Lost World, in the long grass there is a mystery monster that seems to drag someone into the grass, and people start to panic. And at this point, they simply couldn't resist. They just couldn't resist doing it. They couldn't resist having the leader draw a metal sword. This is 10,000 BC. 10,000 BC it's supposed to be. And I don't know, generously, we're like 6,000, 5 or 6,000, a long time away from people being able to cast bronze, bringing copper and tin together to make a bronze weapon, and especially a sword. They simply couldn't imagine a world without metal. And I find that really disappointing. In a film called 10,000 BC that promises this prehistoric epic drama, they simply couldn't conceive of a world where people didn't have metal swords. For me, this is the biggest disappointment so far. Like, what is the point of this film? Anyway, that deserves 5 bads, I'm afraid. I'm going to give this film 5 bads for that. In fact, 10. Let's give it 10 bads. Because it shows a lack of research, a lack of respect, a lack of artistic integrity for the premise of this film being a prehistoric adventure. No, I'm sorry. Metal should not be here. And I'd been spotting it in, like I say, in the horse bridles and the clothing, and I was really hoping it wasn't going to be metal. But they've got metal. Anyway, they all camp overnight, and Delay and the other heroes have caught up with the camp, and they're keeping out of sight. And in the morning, one of the bad guys, one of these not Arabs, approaches Everlet with a slightly sort of sleazy look on his face, and Delay knocks this guy out, rescues Everlet, and a chase ensues. People scatter into the jungle, and at this point the bad guys are trying to recapture their human prizes, their slaves, workforce, whatever they want these people for. And as people are running into the undergrowth, the mystery monster is revealed. Is this a wild boar, or a giant deer, or something else you might find in the tundra jungle? Well, it's an ostrich. It's a giant ostrich, Struthio demanicensis, I do believe. Which is kind of good, because it is a creature actually from the time. It's not a dinosaur, I guess. That's good. But it's also bad, because this creature is not a jungle creature. It's found, or was found, in what is now Georgia. And it feels very much as though the director, or the art director, or someone said, we need something like a dinosaur. We need something like a velociraptor. Find me something. And so they stretched the definitions, and they came up with this creature. And so I'm going to give it a good and bad, because this is actually part of that vision that I was just talking about, this idea of this prehistoric world that's being presented to us, this sort of epic prehistoric vision. Well, we actually are seeing something here that is different. This is not a dinosaur. This is a giant ostrich. That's kind of cool. So it's good, but also it's bad. Another bad quickly follows as Delay runs into a bamboo forest. Where are we meant to be? The tundra jungle of Asia? Like, it's like it literally looks like the House of Flying Daggers. You know, that scene where the heroes are running through the bamboo forest. That's where Delay finds himself. Anyway, the ostrich is trying to get at him, and and he's sort of snapping bamboo all over the place. Delay quite rightly sees a piece of bamboo that's a bit sharp looking, stabs the ostrich in the head, the ostrich comes down. It's convenient, I'll give you that, but it's just bizarre. It's bad. And of course, while our hero is being attacked by an ostrich, what a strange sentence. Evelet and Baku are caught, or re-caught, I guess, in the case of Evelet, by the bad guys. You just see a net capture them, and they're dragged away. And that's actually where I had to pause the film. We're about 38 minutes in to a 1 hour, 11 minutes long movie. And I had to go and get on with my day, thankfully, actually, because I was starting to get really quite annoyed. But also, actually, the DVD started skipping at that point on my PC. Maybe the computer itself was saying, you need to stop. You need to just wait a moment. Maybe there's some advanced sort of emotional AI going on my PC that just could sense how frustrated I was becoming. But anyway, that's where we're going to pause, and that's where part 1 comes to an end. And that's kind of the story of this film so far, I think. It has potential, and it shows, whether deliberately or by accident, lots of good things, lots of good ideas, and it's introducing sound concepts about prehistory in particular. But I simply have to, in the proper way, reflect just how inappropriate metal is in this movie. And so, yeah, those extra points, I'm afraid, are warranted. This is no longer a film about 10,000 BC. This is now an absolute fantasy flick where we've gone from the tundra to the jungle to a bamboo forest. And who knows what's to come? Well, I know one thing for certain. Saber-toothed tigers and apparently pyramids. I won't think about that just now. Anyway, I'm looking forward to seeing what comes next, at least in this movie, and hopefully you are too. As ever, guys, until next time, do take care. Bye-bye.